Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of Longlegs. Longlegs has been described as the scariest movie of the year. I think for the most part that is self-proclaimed, but they used it in every single poster and trailer, and I think they did a fantastic job marketing this movie. It reminded me of Oreo back in the day, marketing themselves as America's favorite cookie. Prove they weren't. Well, I guess they got sued or somebody said they couldn't use that, but I think it's a great way to market the movie. There are some pros and cons to that. The pro is you have people talking about it, buzzing about it, and that's what I had going into this movie. Didn't even look at any reviews online, but the people in my life started telling me about this movie who had seen it before me and were building that hype for me. So that's the pro. You have people talking about it. Is it going to live up to that title, the scariest movie of the year? The con is you're going to have people say, scariest movie of the year. Pff, I'll go into that movie. It won't scare me. And you have like this wall around you going into it that you already think in your head, this is going to be scary, so I'm not going to let it scare me. So what this movie did was build that hype. And those first people who went to go watch it and started raving about it, and like I will tell you about it now, are going to build this hype for this movie because it is that good. But the problem is the people who go watch it on the second week, third week, later on streaming are going to hear that hype and then say, wasn't that scary? Everybody overhyped it. That is just what happens with a good movie like this. An overhyped movie doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it was probably so good that people were raving about it. People were wanting to tell other people to go see this movie. So there's no way you can live up to that expectation. But for me, was it the scariest movie of the year? I am going to say yes. I loved everything about Longlegs. And I don't want to, obviously, I never spoil anything on this podcast. I don't really talk past the first act. But there are details in this movie that I don't even feel would be spoilers, but I won't even get into them because this is one of those movies that, and even the smallest details feel like really big things that you discover. So there are things I could tell you about the characters that I loved, but I don't want to get into it because I want you to see this if you're a horror fan and experience it for yourself without knowing a whole lot about the plot, because I really didn't know too much about it. And here's what the actual description of the movie is. In a pursuit of a serial killer, an FBI agent uncovers a series of occult clues that she must solve to end a terrifying killing spree. A longer description is FBI agent Lee Harker, who was one of my favorite horror leads in a really long time, because horror movies like this tend to have a female lead, but sometimes they're always written the same way. What I loved about Lee Harker in this movie, played by Micah Monroe, is that she had a different personality. She was a little bit socially awkward, very introverted. She's an FBI agent, so obviously she's very smart and has a passion for law enforcement, obviously, to get to that level. But she was so unlike any other lead I've seen in a horror movie like this that I just felt like her character was refreshing and it wasn't the same thing over and over. So she has this gift that they talk about early in the movie where they either think she is psychic or just has a really good intuition when it comes to solving crimes. So she gets put onto this case of the Longlegs killer, who has this really weird calling card that they leave letters at the murders with these encrypted symbols that she later has to try and figure out. So that's the first part of her tackling this case. So it kind of reminded me of Zodiac, which is a great David Fincher movie. And I would say the first act of this movie very much just felt like a true crime movie where there were some horror elements. It really leaned into the sounds, which a couple weeks ago in the trailer park where I started talking about this movie, I showcased the very haunting sounds in the movie. And I think that is really what it leaned into very early on, where it let your mind kind of go crazy because it didn't really show you a whole lot. But just building this tension through these really big shots with the character just right there in the center, these slow pans into this mysterious darkness, and just those sounds that allowed you sitting there in the theater to freak yourself out, not by showing you, but you in your mind thinking what could be there, what could be making these really crazy sounds. What this movie really did a good job was was setting that tone of terror. And how did they do that? So much of this movie takes place at night, and oftentimes Lee Harker, the agent, is always alone. So you always start to freak yourself out because she's alone, nothing around her, she's hearing things, and everything is dark. So for the majority of this movie, the entire theater was dark. So I really feel like that helped overall with making me feel more and more scared as the movie went along. Sometimes I was wondering, like, why is she always alone and why does she always have all the lights off? But that's just horror movies for you. So, continuing on with the description of this movie, as the case takes complex turns, unearthing evidence of the occult, Harker discovers a personal connection to the merciless killer and the race to stop him before he claims the lives of another innocent family. So, that is essentially the plot of the movie. And at 1 hour and 36 minutes, the movie really wasted no time diving right into the story, pretty upfront, giving you some disturbing images, and then really walking that line of giving you things, building story, giving you scary things, building story. And even when you think that it starts to lose you just a little bit, it sucks you back in. And for me, when I go watch a horror movie like this, most times I can predict how the movie is going to end. The last movie that happened in was Smile. Within that first 20 minutes, I already knew exactly how that movie was going to end. They really built a lot of the scary moments through jump scares, which can feel a little bit cheap. But overall, Smile was still a pretty good horror movie. But Longlegs is on an entirely different level. You can tell within the opening scene that it just feels different when it comes to the score of this movie, even when it comes to the graphics and the text and how all the flashback scenes are framed differently, where normally the scene takes up the entire screen in the movie theater, but then these flashback scenes have like this little square, has that home movie type from like back in the 70s and 80s. And even that on its own was just creepy in itself. Whenever the entire screen goes red and you have the black letters, it just really brings that energy to the movie. That paired with the excellent cinematography, where I really loved how they framed the characters. They didn't feel the need to have, big cinematic close-ups. They would often frame Micah Moore in the middle, almost bottom half of the screen, and showed so much of the background. So really gave you this feeling of emptiness. You could kind of feel her anguish a little bit more when the scenes were framed that way. So I thought that was really great. So she did fantastic. It looked fantastic. The score was fantastic. But then you throw in Nicolas Cage as Longlegs, who looks unrecognizable and is so freaky in this movie. I knew that it was Nicolas Cage because he is listed in the credits. Very front of the movie, they say Nicolas Cage as Longlegs. But while watching this movie, you could convince me that that was not Nicolas Cage, because with this makeup he had on, this wig, the prosthetics they had on his face did not look like him whatsoever. And sometimes Nicolas Cage is a little bit hit or miss. I don't always think it's his performances. Sometimes I just feel like he doesn't pick the best roles. But if you put Nicolas Cage in a great role, especially in horror, where all of his kookiness can really come out, that mixed with a great director, Nicolas Cage is a great actor. His performance really made the movie. Whenever his character was on screen, you could not look away. And that's really what happened. That was my experience, because 30 minutes into this movie, I had to go pee. But I did not want to miss a single thing, because it felt like every single scene was building up this story, and I didn't want to miss a single second of it. So I held it for the entire time. Luckily, this movie is less than 2 hours. So, didn't pee my pants. Oz Perkins did a fantastic job as a director and left nothing on the table, which is always my biggest gripe when it comes to horror movies, because I always feel like they want to set it up for a second one. They want to build a franchise. This one gave you everything, and it felt like a very complete, twisted, dark fairy tale that you would tell kids at night to terrorize them. Go to sleep right now, or Longlegs is coming for you. And what makes this movie so polarizing is the lore created around Longlegs, and you wanting to know more about this character, them giving you some details, but not giving you everything. It's the mystery behind it. You don't need to know every detail. You don't need to know the entire origin story. Just seeing this character is terrifying enough, and really the less you know, the more scary it is in your mind, which I love horror movies that allow you to build that terror in your brain because where your imagination can go sometimes is even scarier than what they can show you on the screen. Another thing I picked out from the trailer of this movie that if you turn up your laptop or your phone brightness a little bit more, you see these little Easter eggs of things hiding in the dark in the movie. I paid attention to that because there are little flashes of sinister characters that create these little Easter egg moments that blink and you miss it. But if you do see it, it scares the crap out of you. So, yes, it is the scariest horror movie of the year. But not only that, I think one of the best theater experiences I've had so far will probably make my top 10 movies at the end of the year. A rare occurrence where my entire theater was silent throughout the entire movie. You could hear a pin drop in this theater because everybody was so tuned in, wanting to see what was going to happen next. That rarely happens. I will say it's a different type of scary because I remember leaving the theater after watching The Conjuring for the first time, and I was a little bit freaked out to go out to my car. I probably had a nightmare that night, and that was the last movie to really scare me in theaters because of just the shock value of that movie. This one was a little bit different. It almost felt like this movie put me in a trance. While I was watching it, I was just not there. I was kind of observing my own body take in this film. But as soon as the movie was over, the credits rolled, and I left the theater, it was like that trance went away. So yes, it is scary, but really to me, it felt more sinister and unsettling, anxiety inducing, and a very rare thing for a movie to really ramp up at the end. I feel like they put a cinder block on the gas pedal and balls to the wall to close out this movie. There are like two or three things that I had a little bit of an issue with that I don't even want to reveal to you because I feel they lean on the spoiler side. So I feel like Longlegs is an almost perfect movie. I give it 4.5 out of 5 FBI agents.